natural disasters, famine, and war. We also see how the generosity of others can change lives. You and CNN's Impact Your World can help. Reputable charities that are checked out by CNN. See the difference it makes when you give time, share stories, or donate. By just clicking the button, be a part of the solution. Impact Your World.
An 11th hour reprieve. The inaugural flight of a controversial UK government plan to send refugees to Rwanda was stopped. But is the scheme gone for good? We explore this hour. Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher, filling in for Becky Anderson. Welcome back to Connect the World. The UK government standing firmly behind its deportation plan right now. That's despite the first migrant flight to Rwanda being stopped in its tracks minutes before departure, when the European Court of Human Rights intervened. Britain's Home Secretary says she's disappointed, but plans for the next flights are already in the works. Priti Patel coming up against some fierce pushback in Parliament today when she vowed the government would plough ahead with the scheme.
Indeed, we are proud that we are working together, proud that the UK is investing in Rwanda and helping that great country to thrive, and proud that those who are relocated to Rwanda will have an opportunity to thrive as well.
It is government by gimmick. It's not in the public interest, it's just in their political interest. And what are they prepared to trash along the way? People's lives, our basic British values of fairness, decency and common sense, and the reputation of our nation.
Nada Bashir has been speaking to migrants across the English Channel in France. She joins us live now from Paris. So, Nada, yesterday's flight cancelled because of a legal setback. Essentially, the European Court of Human Rights intervened. What more can you tell us about the cancellation?
Yep, we have been letting more details just over the last few hours from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, confirming that 3 asylum seekers who were due to be on that flight out from the UK to Rwanda last night were removed from the flight. Their deportation notice cancelled because of that intervention by the European Court of Human Rights. But I have to say, these are just some of the asylum seekers who've had their deportation notices cancelled. We were expecting more than 100 people to be on that flight originally. So we saw that first legal challenge at the High Court on Friday, and since that day, we saw those numbers dwindling down to just 7 yesterday. And the information we've been hearing from these advocacy groups that have been representing the asylum seekers is that European Court of Human Rights challenge there late last night gave way and allowed for time for lawyers representing the rest of those set to be deported to submit last-minute applications. Now, we have seen all of those who had received notice have those notices either postponed or cancelled for varying reasons, but the overriding reason that we're hearing from rights groups is that there needs to be more time for these asylum seekers to have their claims challenged in the courts, to put forward a legal challenge, and of course also for the policy as a whole to be challenged. We do expect that legal challenge in July, looking at whether or not this is lawful. But as you heard there from the Home Secretary, she has reiterated that despite the criticism that the government has faced and come under, they will be pushing ahead with this policy. Take a listen.
We believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun. This government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable legal last-minute challenges, nor we will allow mobs, Madam Deputy Speaker, to block removals.
So not surprising, the government has been expecting those legal challenges, and as you heard, they're already preparing for those next flights to take off once legally approved. But I have to say that the opposition that the government has been facing isn't just from the Labour Party or other parliamentarians. We have heard from the UN's Refugee Agency describing this policy as unlawful, Human Rights Watch warning that Rwanda exhibits an appalling human rights record, and even the Church of England describing the policy set out by the government as immoral. Zain?
Nada Bashir, live for us there, as you mentioned. Priti Patel certainly determined to push ahead with another flight. All right, thank you so much. My next guest represents a man due to be flown to Rwanda. Francis Swain says the government should consider whether these flights are worth it financially or legally before attempting another one. Frances joins us live now. So Frances, thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, you can't reveal your client's identity, and of course you want to respect that. But what can you tell us about what he was fleeing from, the sorts of conditions he was leaving behind in his home country, and also his hopes to resettle in the UK?
So our client is claiming himself a victim of human trafficking or modern slavery and enforced labour during that period of trafficking, and also has signs of torture in his previous homeland. His hopes for the future were to make his way to the United Kingdom and to claim asylum.
And what has his reaction been about the prospect of now being forced to head to Rwanda, potentially?
Well, he was very upset. It was a great shock to him. It was not the country where he had hoped to claim asylum. We all have, every member of the global planet has the opportunity to claim asylum if we're being persecuted in our own homelands. And he was making his way to the United Kingdom. It wasn't so much Rwanda per se, but for him it was the United Kingdom that he wanted to claim in. And therefore he was very frightened of being sent on anywhere else. He's had a hard journey getting here in the first place. And there wasn't another country that he had chosen.
Right, so it's nothing to do with Rwanda, nothing personally against Rwanda. It's just that he had his heart set on the UK. So now that the first flight has been cancelled, what's next?
What's next for the country, or what's next
for your client? I'm sorry, for your client.
Okay. That's all right. I mean, they're both very valid questions. Well, for my client, he's been returned to one of the detention centres, which is common for those who are seeking asylum in Britain. So he will make his particular claim when his turn comes. The order that we received yesterday said that there's a stay, or a legal stay on his removal, an injunction preventing him from being removed. And he will now turn to making his claim for asylum here.
So Priti Patel has said that the UK government is going to press on. She vowed that they're going to press on with another sort of scheduled flight in the future, and that she believes the UK government has met all of its sort of moral and legal obligations. What's your response to that?
Well, as far as the legal obligations go, the domestic courts right up to the Supreme Court, so High Court, Court of Appeal and Supreme Court, they agreed that the government had the right to make its own policy, and they weren't going to stand in the way of what the government was intending to do as a democratically elected government. However, at the same time, there is actually a judicial review challenging the legality itself of the policy. So that is a generic challenge to whether or not it's lawful to bring in the particular policy which the government is intending to bring in, and that will be heard in July. We don't have a date yet, but we know there'll be an assessment made in July. From a moral perspective, I think I agree with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in his view that Britain has shamefully abandoned the UK's responsibility under the Refugee Convention, which is something we helped set up in the first place. I very much would like our country to be caring and compassionate and to comply with the Refugee Convention, as so many other countries do.
What do you think, when you think about the government's argument, from their perspective, and this is just me sort of playing devil's advocate, from their perspective, not only is housing refugees and asylum seekers in the UK extremely expensive, but you also have the issue of human trafficking, you have the issue of people smuggling, you have the sort of dangerous journeys across the English Channel that a lot of these migrants make, many of whom, of course, lose their lives on the way from Calais to England. What do you think, as somebody who is obviously incredibly invested in this story, given that you're representing one of these asylum seekers, what do you think is the solution here?
Well, of course, it's a huge tragedy for the loss of any human life. I think in itself it points more to the fact that the government should be trying to tackle the human traffickers themselves rather than pointing a finger at people who are legitimately seeking asylum in the United Kingdom. If they were to try to tackle the human traffickers, one of the best ways of doing that would be for them to set up safe routes for travel to the United Kingdom. There have been safe routes in the past. The Syria scheme has been brought to an end. The scheme in Afghanistan, which was supposed to provide safe applications for asylum, is not working as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, and very few of the numbers we said we would take have arrived here, very few indeed. And it would be possible to set up a safe route such as one that exists for Ukrainian citizens at the moment. That is working, and citizens of the Ukraine can claim asylum here with relative ease compared with anyone else.
And if you could just clarify something for me. Now that this first flight has been cancelled, it was scheduled to take off yesterday, it's been cancelled. Obviously, your client is not on this flight. Is your client scheduled to be on the next flight? I know that he's being housed in a detention centre right now, but is he scheduled to be on the next flight out of the UK going to Rwanda?
We haven't seen any lists at all of any of the asylum seekers who are supposedly to go on the next flight. I wouldn't have expected so, given the court order that was made and served upon the Home Office in respect of my client yesterday. But it has been very unclear what criteria have been used by the Home Office in choosing asylum seekers to go on the flight. For instance, there were quite a number of unaccompanied minors who were on the flight, and they were some of the first people to be told they wouldn't have to go.
So what happens after July? I mean, obviously, this ruling by the European Court of Human Rights is sort of an interim ruling. After July, when that ruling comes, do we get sort of complete clarity? What happens after that?
Well, I think both the applicants who represent some of the asylum seekers and also the government will have to assess the actual legal outcome when it gets to the Supreme Court. If, of course, it is found that the policy is in fact illegal and the scheme that's been set up cannot function, then it would be up to the government to decide whether or not it will change the law, which it would have to do in that case, to make it legal. If they decided to change the law, then they would be able to go ahead with it. So I know there's been discussion in Parliament and elsewhere today about potentially withdrawing from the ECHR, but that would be a very lengthy process, and personally I don't think in anyone's best interest.
Right, incredibly complicated, so many moving parts, and as we sort of sit here and debate this, your client is in limbo, doesn't really know what his future holds at this point in time. Frances, we have to leave it there. I really appreciate, by the way, you coming on the programme and sharing your client's perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Ahead on Connect the World, a top human rights lawyer will join me a little bit later on. We'll look at what the UK has in mind after that thumping legal loss for its controversial deportation plan. And Western weapons and ammunition are helping Ukrainian troops in the war with Russia, while the soldiers say what they've got now isn't nearly enough. And Americans, like many others around the world, are feeling the pinch at the checkout line. Can the US Federal Reserve potentially ease the pain? We'll walk through that next. I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, tonight on CNN.
Forced labor looks different in different countries and different sectors. My name is Jonas Astrup. I'm the Chief Technical Advisor for the ILO Third-Party Monitoring Project in Uzbekistan. And I've been based in Tashkent for the last 4 years. Uzbekistan is the 6th largest producer of cotton in the world, but the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan is the world's largest recruitment effort, with approximately 2 million people picking cotton every year from September to November. And ILO has been monitoring the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan for child labor since 2013 and for child labor and forced labor since 2015 under an agreement with the World Bank. We have witnessed incredible changes during that time. 2 million children out of child labor and 500,000 adults out of forced labor. We have seen wages increased by over 600%. We have seen the number of labor inspectors doubled and perpetrators punished. Forced labor and child labor is now a criminal offense in Uzbekistan. We've seen awareness raising campaigns to make sure that people are aware of their rights, and we have seen a liberalization and a privatization of the agricultural system. There's still work to do in Uzbekistan, but I think it's fair to say that Uzbekistan is a success story in the world of work.
A pivotal moment has arrived in Russia's war in Ukraine. That assessment coming from US and other Western intelligence officials who note that Ukraine is burning through its Soviet-era munitions as it fends off relentless Russian attacks. NATO defense ministers meeting in Brussels today are set to address President Volodymyr Zelensky's repeated pleas for more advanced weaponry. The NATO Secretary General says that more help is on the way.
We are extremely focused on stepping up, providing more support, more advanced weapons, and also to do that in the best possible way for the Ukrainians, because we support them in their just fight against the brutal Russian invasion.
Ukrainian forces are struggling to keep partial control of the key city of Severodonetsk. Ukraine's military chief in the Luhansk region of the Donbass says that Russia is attacking from 3 directions and destroying residential buildings. Ben Wiedemann joins us live now from Kramatorsk in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. This is really a crucial time, Ben, in this war. What are you seeing on the ground?
I mean, basically what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces are barely hanging on in a very small corner of Severodonetsk, that Azot chemical complex. By and large, the Russians are now essentially in control of about 97% of the Luhansk region. And what we're seeing is that the Russians have been able to take full advantage of their superiority in firepower, particularly artillery. And we were at a training session for Ukrainian troops who've been given American light arms, small arms, but they told us time and time again what they need to stop this Russian advance, and they are advancing, is heavy weapons and artillery particularly. American symbol, American weapon. Ukrainian troops try out new equipment, U.S.-supplied M4 rifles fresh out of the box. Away from the front lines, these soldiers are preparing to join the battle raging in the east. This exercise is designed to accustom Ukrainian forces to the use of Western weapons. This is an American .50 caliber machine gun firing Italian bullets. There's a problem, though. We're told there's not enough Western ammunition. And not enough weapons either. Even in this drill, much of the firepower dates back to the Soviet era. Ukrainian forces are slowly losing ground in the battle for the eastern Donbass region. Morale here is high.
Good morning, Vietnam!
Yet no one believes these rifles will halt the Russian advance.
This is not enough.
Ukrainian officials say Russian artillery outnumbers their artillery at a ratio of perhaps more than 10 to 1. Used to deadly effect in the city of Severodonetsk, now almost completely under Russian control. Big guns, not small arms, could help Ukraine turn the tide.
I can protect myself as a soldier with this weapon. I can protect my comrades. But unfortunately, I can't clear my country from invaders using only these rifles. So we need more artillery. We need heavy rocket system and other seriously weapons because it's the modern war.
From USA.
The U.S. and its allies have delivered advanced weapon systems to Ukraine, and more are on the way. But the army here is losing men at an alarming rate, more than 100 killed in action every day, according to Ukrainian officials. We need a basic minimum to avoid more casualties. Artillery, smart weapons, radar, drones, and people to train us, says the commander, Lieutenant Alexander, a veteran of the French Foreign Legion. We've shown we will fight. We will learn to use these weapons. And that will take time. And time is a luxury this nation at war cannot afford. And the irony is that this situation, this grave situation in the Donbas region, comes as no surprise. This offensive by the Russians has been going on for 2 months. I was in Severodonetsk in April. Back then it was being clobbered by Russian artillery, and the Ukrainians have been appealing time and time again for these high-tech weapon systems to be delivered as quickly as possible. But many Ukrainians feel that the West, despite their good words, their words of encouragement, in the end, it's just a lot of talk. Zain?
Yeah, the Ukrainians need action at this point. They need those weapons. The situation in the Donbas region, as you point out, Ben, is desperate. I want to talk about the humanitarian situation, Ben, because there has been some uncertainty over Russia's unilateral humanitarian corridor in Severodonetsk. What more do we know at this point?
Well, the Russians have offered a humanitarian corridor for the people who are in the Azot chemical complex, approximately 400 to 500, according to Ukrainian officials. The problem is it's conditional that these people who are evacuated go to Russian-controlled territory, which means many may end up in these so-called filtration camps where anyone with affiliation with intelligence, with police, with local administration could be detained, interrogated. So the Ukrainians are not at all enthusiastic about that idea. Now, what you have is these people are basically running out of food supplies because all 3 bridges over the river into Severodonetsk have been destroyed. So it's very difficult to get anything to them. And it's equally difficult to get the people out to Ukrainian-controlled territory. Zain?
Yeah, as much as we talk about the fighting, we have to remember that the civilians, especially those who are trapped, are in desperate need of food and help. Ben Wiedemann, live for us there. Thank you so much. The Ukraine crisis is behind some of the turmoil we've seen in the world economies lately. Prices are up all over, in some cases putting fuel and even food out of reach. Now, some central banks are taking action. Today, the European Central Bank held an emergency meeting to try to calm bond markets. And in just a few hours from now, the US Federal Reserve could announce the biggest rate hike in terms of interest rates in nearly 30 years. That is, of course, aimed at reining in those soaring prices. We've got this covered across 2 continents for you. Claire Sebastian is following the ECB meeting for us from London. We've got business correspondent Rahel Solomon live for us in New York. Claire, let me start with you. What is the ECB going to do, and is it going to be enough to calm nervous markets?
Yeah, Zain, this was a really quite unusual move from the ECB today. What happened was when they announced at their regularly scheduled meeting last week that they were going to move towards their first rate rise in 11 years at their next meeting in July and end asset purchases that month as well. That really sparked a huge sell-off in especially the government bonds of very indebted European countries like Italy. And then the difference between the Italian bonds and the German bonds, that is seen as sort of a fear gauge in the European Union. That widened to its widest point since 2020. So that was really a sense of sort of stress in the markets. So the ECB, 6 days after that meeting, has had to come out and flesh out their previous statement and show what they're going to do about these diverging borrowing costs across the Eurozone, what is called fragmentation. What they're going to do is, one new thing. They say they're going to launch a new program aimed at anti-fragmentation. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. It will still need the approval of the ECB Governing Council. And they're also going to deploy the funds that come from maturing bonds from their pandemic-era bond purchase program as well. They're going to try to do that to mitigate the strains in different areas of the Eurozone. So a couple of things they're doing. As for whether the markets are appreciating it, I think the jury's out on that. The euro has given up a lot of its gains against the dollar, but Italian bond yields have come down a little bit below their highs of the week. So perhaps at this stage, the markets are giving them the benefit of the doubt.
And just walk us through how we got here, Claire. Why is the process of raising rates, even amid record high inflation, why is it fraught with so much risk?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because, of course, compared to what the Fed is doing with perhaps a 0.75% rate rise, the ECB, and it won't be its first either in this cycle, the ECB hasn't raised rates yet. It hasn't done it in 11 years. Rates are actually negative in the European Union. And Christine Lagarde, the ECB president, has maintained that the European Union, the Eurozone in particular, is not on as solid an economic footing as the US, that she wants to wait and move gradually, that the potential shocks from the Ukraine war are closer to the economy of Europe than they are to the US. And look, that's true. Europe is trying to wean itself off Russian energy. We're seeing even this week that Gazprom is cutting back gas supplies flowing through the Nord Stream pipeline that serves Germany, of course, which is Europe's biggest economy. So there are great risks out there to the Eurozone. But I think the key difference here is that the ECB and Christine Lagarde are trying to set monetary policy for 19 different countries with very different debt levels and very different inflation rates at the moment, Zain.
Right, Claire, stand by. Let me bring in Rahel Solomon. So Rahel, in about, let's see, let me do my math. 2.5 hours from now or so, we are going to hear what the Fed is going to be doing in terms of interest rates. Everybody basically seems to think we're going to see 75 basis points in terms of an interest rate hike. Just explain to us what's the risk here, just in terms of what ends up happening to the U.S. economy as a result of that rate increase.
Well, Zain, when the Fed raises rates, it essentially makes borrowing more expensive for all of us U.S. consumers, which is exactly the point. They're trying to curb demand. They're trying to get us to spend less. The challenge for the Fed, however, is that if they do so too drastically, it could sort of pump the brakes on the economy. We could really contract. So, right, a real sort of a break on the economy in terms of spending. And so it's a very delicate balance to begin with from the Fed or for the Fed. That said, there is another issue emerging, that there is a feeling in the investment community that there is a reputational crisis, a credibility crisis for the Fed. So I think, what we're going to hear today is probably some very strong language. The expectation, as you said, is 0.75%, but also some very strong language signaling that the Fed plans to stay on top of inflation, that they have a handle on it, and that they plan to rein it in. But all indications at this point is that they don't have a handle on it yet, because the last reading we got for inflation showed that not only was it not moderating, but it was accelerating. And that proved to be quite a difficult sticking point for the Federal Reserve, which is probably why prior to about 48 hours ago, prior to the last few days, the expectation for today's meeting, Zain, was 50 basis points, or about 0.5%. And then all of a sudden we got that inflation report, which showed U.S. inflation soaring or accelerating for sure. And then we started to hear these rumblings that it's probably going to look a lot more like 0.75%.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you point out, the Fed needs to prove that they actually know what they're doing here, that the economy is or inflation rather, is in safe hands in terms of how they're going to handle this. When you think about the U.S. consumer, Rahel, they're dealing with right now in the U.S. obviously much higher gas prices, soaring food prices, for example, even travel. Travel is expensive in this country right now. And then on top of that, you're now going to be dealing with much higher borrowing costs. So, what is next in terms of consumer spending for this country?
Zain, I think you touch on a really interesting point. I think what we're seeing in terms of U.S. consumers is a tale of two consumers, is what I hear from economists, essentially, that those who are middle and upper class are, still able to afford spending, and we're still seeing that. But for those who don't really have a ton of wiggle room in their budget to begin with, they're getting burned on both sides. They're seeing prices increase because of inflation. And now if you have to borrow, which of course some folks do, now you're going to likely see interest rates start to rise. So there is a very real concern about affordability in terms of rent and shelter and also just cost of living. Food prices, we know, are double-digit increases in terms of consumer inflation. Of course, I mean, gas, it's the top story on the American news every single night. So there is a very real concern about those who are living paycheck to paycheck and about the suffering that we may see in terms of high inflation and now raising rates.
Yeah, it's almost like two different countries. I mean, as you point out, this really is highlighting major economic inequality in this country. Rahel Solomon, Claire Sebastian, thank you ladies both so much. Appreciate it. All right, you are watching Connect the World. This plane never left the ground, but the British government says that won't ground its controversial deportation plan. I'll be speaking live with a top human rights lawyer next.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here. People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly?
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. And now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
I want to return now to our top story. The UK government is digging in, vowing to move ahead with its very controversial deportation plan to Rwanda. This comes after Tuesday's flight for asylum seekers to Kigali was grounded. The plane was on the tarmac when the European Court of Human Rights intervened. Now the UK says preparations for another flight are actually already underway. British Home Secretary Priti Patel addressed the UK Parliament earlier today. I want you to listen to what she had to say.
While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy.
My next guest is a leading human rights lawyer who has been an active member of the British Labour Party and is also part of the legal team for the charity organisation Asylum Aid, which lost its initial bid to have a general injunction to block the Rwanda flights. Baroness Helena Kennedy joins us live now from London. Baroness Kennedy, thank you so much for being with us. So here's the thing. The asylum system actually costs the UK roughly around £1.5 billion a year. That includes things like hotels and various sort of housing for a lot of these asylum seekers. Obviously, the issue of immigration has been front and centre in UK politics for many, many years, decades in fact. What is the right solution here, do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, the cost of providing for those who are fleeing persecution shouldn't be one of the considerations, although I'm quite sure that it is one of those things that people think about. But really, our obligations, we've signed treaties to this effect, that we will provide sanctuary for those who are fleeing persecution. And so then, of course, you have to make a determination as to whether someone is indeed a legitimate refugee. And that process is one that should be as quick as possible. Now, what we're doing is we're outsourcing this. We're actually going to transfer those who come across the channel, because we don't like them coming across the channel, at least our Home Secretary doesn't, is that we're going to actually send them off to Rwanda. And we've done a deal with Rwanda, paying Rwanda to take our asylum seekers so that they get them instead of the UK. And it's a pretty sorry principle to be establishing. And happily, the European Court of Human Rights has said that this is contrary to human rights, and that it must be possible for a judicial review to be heard, which is, and a judicial review is in the offing. It's due to be heard next month. A judicial review of the decision to do this and to have this policy as to whether it contravenes the rights of the individuals, and so those cases are due to be heard. And what the European Court said was the right thing to do is to wait and find out the outcome of those hearings on judicial review, which are very different from the hearings which have already taken place inside our country. That's where the Home Secretary, I'm afraid, has got her law wrong. She said the European Court was disappointing because it flew in the face of decisions by British judges. The British judges were dealing with applications for injunction. And an injunction, the threshold to get an injunction is very high. And the judges, both at the first instance and then at the Court of Appeal, said that threshold had not been met because you have to be able to show that there would be irreparable damage. And what the government said was, we'll have people back if they win their cases. We'll take them back and we'll fly them back into the country if they win their cases.
So let me ask you. So you disagree with Priti Patel there, but let me ask you this. The government says that their main motivation is really just sort of to prevent dangerous crossings from Calais, across the English Channel to England. They also want to thwart human trafficking, human smuggling. They say that that is their main motivation in conjuring up this scheme. Do you believe them?
Well, the problem is that the people who are coming this way have no other mechanism for getting into the United Kingdom because we're an island, we're off a mainland. And so unless they are one of three categories, unless they're coming in on the new Ukraine offerings, and even that has been very slow. The offering that we made to people fleeing from Afghanistan, who were people who worked for us, we took in 15,000. That's the equivalent of basically 3,000 families. And so we aren't being very generous in our offerings, and we're taking in people from Hong Kong. The numbers of people that we're taking in have reduced considerably over the last 10 years and more. We've seen a significant drop in the number of people coming to this country because it's so hard to get here. And so the people who are taking these risks are usually coming to join family members who are already here. It's an instinct for people to want to be with those that they love and those that they care about. And they pay traffickers because it's the only way. And of course, what happens is that their whole family pool all their resources, sell what they own in order to select one of their family who is likely to be persecuted, to let them flee.
And you also, and to your point, you also have to sort of wonder, what must a person have gone through in their home country? What must they be fleeing from in order to be willing to take that risk? I want to ask you, how does the government, to its point, thwart, human trafficking, human smuggling, stop these dangerous crossings, while at the same time complying with international law? What is the right solution?
Well, one of the things that Mrs. Patel has just done is that she said that anybody who comes via trafficking will be criminalised, because that is not an acceptable way to enter our country. To punish the people who are the victims of traffickers is not the way to go. And in fact, many of these people who come into our country would be able to give invaluable intelligence about who it was that they ended up paying. They may have phone numbers of people that they were put in contact with, and good operations, undercover operations, could get to the heart of some of this highly financed business. So, I mean, we're not going about this in the right way. You don't punish the people who are drug addicts by, you don't get to the people who traffic in drugs by punishing people who have got an addiction. So, I mean, all I would say is that you don't do it this way round. They're going from the bottom up, and they should use those who are being brought into the country by traffickers. They should use them as an intelligence resource. They should give them their trust and confidence, and then they will help in the identification of the processes that are being used so that these gangs can be broken. That's the way that you go about it, and that's where you invest your money, not by giving it to Rwanda, a place that does not have the highest standards in human rights. And we've actually, part of the deal that is not being advertised to the British public is that, in fact, part of the deal is that Rwanda will send to us their asylum seekers who have mental health problems or disabilities. And why is that? Because they do not have the level of psychiatric skills within Rwanda that most people who've been persecuted or feared persecution suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, suffer from many other problems as a result of what they've been through. And Rwanda does not have the numbers of people to resource the help that these people need. So they're going to be sending their asylum seekers who've got those kind of problems to the United Kingdom. That's the small print that is not being told to the British public.
There is a lot, to be honest, that we don't know about this deal between the UK and Rwanda. We know roughly how much money the UK is giving Rwanda, but we have no idea, for example, why Rwanda was chosen or the other terms of the deal. Baroness, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on the programme. All right, just ahead on Connect the World, Say It Isn't So, why fans of the K-pop global phenomenon BTS are in a state of shock. We'll have details after the break.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
This Chinese national treasure is more endangered than the panda. Its lichen-covered forest home at risk. In the high-altitude woodlands of southwest China's Yunnan province, the Yunnan golden monkeys, or black snub-nosed monkeys, are fighting for survival. Almost 100 monkeys are killed by hunters every year in the region, according to the Nature Conservancy.
Villagers rely on mountains. In the old days, they would often climb up the mountains for hunting and other activities such as gathering and cutting trees.
But as part of a forest monitoring campaign, Xu Hao trains local villagers to patrol the monkey's habitat and look for old wire traps.
This is the wire trap. Villagers tie it to the tree and use this to catch some animals.
His team has installed over 100 infrared cameras in the forest to monitor the monkeys, and golden monkey populations in the region are finally increasing, says Li Peng.
This monkey is one of the only kind of animals living in this high altitude. So the existence of this species is kind of important and critical to the whole world.
Can actually feel the hearts of BTS fans breaking all over the world today. Nope, the boy band is not technically breaking up, but they might as well be, given the way the fans are reacting. The group says it's time to go on a hiatus and explore what they can do artistically on their own. They made the unexpected announcement in an anniversary dinner video. Paula Hancock has more from Seoul.
It was just a couple of weeks ago that BTS was at the White House meeting with US President Joe Biden, discussing how to address anti-Asian hate crimes. And now the 7-member group has announced that they will be taking a break to pursue solo pursuits and solo careers. Now, this all came about as they were having an anniversary dinner, which was televised. They posted to their official YouTube channel, and the 7 of them were discussing the fact that they needed a rest, that they needed to take a break. One of them saying that the band had gone through a rough patch and that they needed individually to find their identity. Another also pointing out that within the K-pop industry, it is difficult to try and find time to be able to mature. So the group says that they want to now step back as a group. They're not saying that they are splitting up. They said that they will come back at some point in the future, but for now they want to have their solo careers. Now, it will be a big blow, as we've seen by many comments online, to their very loyal fans known as the ARMY, some expressing devastation, disappointment, but many also saying they understand the band does need to rest. And one of the band members did address that within that dinner.
Right now, we've lost our direction, and I just want to take some time to think and then return. But that just feels rude to our fans, and like I'm letting down their expectations.
Now, to say BTS is successful would be a massive understatement. They are the first group since the Beatles to have had 3 #1 albums on the Billboard 200 chart. Twice they've been nominated for Grammy Awards, and they have fans around the world. Now, one thing that has been speculated on a great deal over the past year or so is the fact that many of them are close to needing to do the compulsory military that you have here in South Korea. As soon as you hit 30, then if you are an able-bodied man, you have to serve at least 18 months in the military, and the group at this point is between the ages of 24 and 29. So that was also something that was hanging over BTS. Paula Hancock, CNN Seoul.
All right, let's get you up to speed on some other stories that are on our radar right now. Iran has confirmed it's preparing to test launch 2 satellite-carrying rockets. With tensions high over Tehran's nuclear program, some experts see the test launches as provocative, since the technology is similar to what is needed for intercontinental ballistic missiles. And Israel is hopeful about relations with Saudi Arabia, with Joe Biden's trip to the region next month. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said he expected improvements in ties with the kingdom. He pointed out they have a mutual interest with regards to Iran. And French-led forces in West Africa have captured a senior leader of an ISIS affiliate. It happened several days ago near the Mali-Niger border. He's expected of organizing several attacks against military bases in Mali. The French Armed Forces Ministry says that he was targeting French forces moving out of Mali after a military coup there. And the Ethiopian government announced it has formed a committee to negotiate with forces from the Tigray region. In an open letter posted on Twitter, the president of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front said he is prepared to participate in the peace process, but that it must be held in Nairobi, Kenya, and mediated by its president. All right, still to come here on Connect the World, I'll be speaking to the British lawmaker whose constituent is one of the fighters sentenced to death by a pro-Russian court in eastern Ukraine. That's next.
women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
A violation of international law. That's what British officials are saying after a pro-Russian proxy court in eastern Ukraine sentenced 2 Britons and a Moroccan national to death last week. The 3 men were fighting for Ukraine when Russian forces captured them in Mariupol in April. Russian state media say the men are being accused of being mercenaries for Ukraine. My next guest is British Conservative Member of Parliament Robert Jenrick. He called the court proceedings a fraudulent show, and he represents the district of where one of the captured men, Aidan Aislinn, is from. First and foremost, your reaction to what's happening to these 2 British nationals in eastern Ukraine.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. These 2 British citizens who have served with the Ukrainian Armed Forces should be being treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. Instead, they've been subjected to this extraordinary and disgusting show trial, like something out of the Soviet era, and now are sentenced to death. We are working closely with the Ukrainian government to see if we can have them released as part of a prisoner exchange. But I think it shows once again the depths to which Putin's Russia is willing to sink. And this is just one of a whole pattern of war crimes being conducted left, right and centre across Ukraine at the moment.
I mean, obviously you point out that you're working with the Ukrainians to secure their release, but what does that mean specifically? Just give us some insight into the negotiations that are taking place right now.
Well, there have been prisoner exchanges between the Ukrainian and the Russian armed forces. At the moment, thousands of Ukrainian personnel are held by the Russians, including a large contingent who were captured around Mariupol. And likewise, there are a good number of Russians who are held by the Ukrainians as well. And so prisoner exchanges are happening and are a natural thing to occur now. I'm hopeful that Aidan Aislinn and Sean Pinner, the 2 British nationals who are in this situation, can be included in one of those prisoner swaps. But of course, we have to be concerned that that won't happen because they've been put on this show trial, a sort of kangaroo court, and given these supposed death sentences, which is a deeply concerning situation. And we have to take that seriously and be mistrustful of what Russia and its proxies are saying, because their other behaviour suggests that they're capable of conducting really despicable war crimes.
So if the worst, I mean, God forbid, but if the worst were to happen here, what would the British response be?
Well, I've been speaking to the British Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, and asking her to issue a very robust statement to Russia, which she has now done, making clear that we hold them responsible for the safe treatment of these British passport holders. This is primarily a negotiation to be conducted between the Ukrainian government and the Russians, because these are individuals who may be British citizens but are serving members of the Ukrainian armed forces. They're not mercenaries, they are Ukrainian soldiers, and so should be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention, the rules of war, as prisoners of war. However, we mustn't escape the fact that these are British citizens, and so were, as you say, God forbid something to happen to them, we, the British, would hold Russia directly accountable for that, because their proxies in Ukraine ultimately are servants of the Russian regime. And if there was a direction to carry out this sentence, it would be a direction that's come from on high in Russia. I'm hopeful that that doesn't happen. That would be a serious miscalculation by the Russian government. But of course, one can never rule it out. That's why we're taking this very seriously.
Right, and you point out that you've spoken to Liz Truss. You're trying to get her to sort of or you tried to get her rather to issue a strongly worded statement, which I believe she's done. I know that she also spoke to Dmitry Kuleba, but what can he actually do about this? This is really about the Russians holding all the cards here.
Well, yes and no. Both sides have conducted prisoner exchanges in the past and would like to do so in the future. And the Ukrainian government have kindly responded to our entreaties to support these two